Russia has once again been hit by the so-called Black August, when the country's economy is plunging into an abyss, and the air is filled with the discontent of the elites and the fear of the citizens. And Russians know very well that Black August is very bad for their country. 35 years ago in August, a group of communists organized a coup against Gorbachev and started a process that a few months later destroyed the Soviet Union. Exactly 7 years later, also in August, Russia went into default that crashed the ruble overnight. A year later, again in August, militants invaded Dagestan. That was the beginning of the war that brought an unknown KGB officer named Vladimir Putin to the pinnacle of power. So, August brought us yet another disaster. The nuclear submarine Kursk also sank in August. The war against Georgia also started in August. And now, in August 2026, the ruble has crashed to March levels and the budget deficit has gotten out of control. And even the mayor of Moscow, Sobyanin, for the first time publicly disagreed with the Kremlin's economic policy. And now, experts have already seen a worrying trend for Russia in these events. This is the very same Black August. Let's break down what's really happening and whether August has really come to Russia. Was it another Black August? My name is Alexei Pechii, let's discuss this topic. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and don't forget to leave any comment to support this channel. So recently several global media outlets published some excellent pieces, and these publications remind us of the entire grim chronology of Black Augusts. That's the 1991 coup, the 1998 default, Dagestan 1999, Kursk in 2000, the war against Georgia in 2008. And now all the experts are asking a direct question. And what is happening in Russia today? Isn't this yet another Black August? And here it's important to capture the current situation. The advance of Russian troops in Ukraine is minimal. The skies over Russian cities are filled with smoke from Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries and logistics centers of Wildberries and Ozon. And long lines at gas stations and rumors of a new wave of mobilization are causing dissatisfaction, panic and fear among Russians. And as we know, for some reason all these Russians are fleeing, to Georgia for example. It's telling that the pro-Kremlin publication Moskovsky Komsomolets even tried to explain the anxiety through astrology this year. They say a lunar eclipse in opposition to Pluto, the planet associated with disasters, is exactly what led to what's happening in the minds of Russians today. So in other words, if you didn't get it, they're trying to mess with Russians' heads using astrology, just to avoid explaining the real reasons for the crisis. They say there's a crisis, but there is no crisis. It just seems that way to you, because right now there's a lunar eclipse in opposition to Pluto. And Vladimir Putin himself at an infrastructure meeting acknowledged the damage from the strikes on the Wildberries warehouses without mentioning the company directly. Here's his quote. It goes without saying that these strikes will not have, do not cause, and cannot lead to any critical consequences, although of course they do cause harm. This is obvious, we understand it, we see it, and we are aware of it. And then Vladimir Putin promised to restore. Restoration at the expense of the state, that is, at the expense of taxpayers. He says, well, Wildberries warehouses burned down, we'll restore them. Russians shelled out, took money out of their savings, because the war has to be paid for. Well, let's think about what really makes this August different from just a typical journalistic cliché. Because Black August is still just a journalistic phrase that has simply become part of history. The thing is, for the first time in a long while, open discontent broke out not in some liberal or Russian émigré circles, but in the words of people from the innermost circle of the Putin system. According to the Wall Street Journal, Russian officials and businessmen are increasingly expressing open discontent with the war, which is causing colossal damage to their economy. Moreover, officials in Russia are already openly speaking out against Vladimir Putin's idea of completely shifting the entire economy to a war footing. Moreover, even the head of Sberbank of Russia, German Gref, publicly stated that society is interested in the swift end of hostilities. He said that continued war will only make things worse for the entire Russian economy. But the harshest statement came from the mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, a person you could hardly suspect of any opposition to Vladimir Putin. No, and here is his quote. To kill normal life and a normal economy means to kill the country itself. This is how Sobyanin reacts to the ideas of shifting the economy to a war footing. And earlier, as you know, Putin fired the chief economist of Bank, Andrei Klepach, who openly began to warn that the Russian Federation's war economy is already stagnating. And according to him, victory in a war of attrition against Ukraine is impossible. And it will inevitably lead to the collapse of Russia itself. And this brave guy, in quotes, was simply fired so he wouldn't say that everything is bad. No, they have to say that everything is wonderful. And such a harsh reaction to a statement like this, like the statement from Andrei Klepach, means firing and intimidation. Well, most likely it won't quell the discontent, but will only increase the irritation among influential officials and businessmen in Russia. Well, it's obvious that ordinary Russians have long been ignored. Who are they anyway? They're just cannon fodder, Russian Ivans who can simply be thrown into the furnace of war. Let them die there and that's it, that's all. And on the other hand, you have to understand that this is exactly what Ukraine is counting on by attacking big businesses like Wildberries or Ozone. The idea is that these officials and businessmen will start to realize that the war is causing them huge losses. And it's in their interest to rein in that bald little dwarf. Well, as for Black August, it's worth bringing up the hard numbers here. The ruble rose from around 82 rubles per dollar to 85. Let me remind you, we haven't seen such values since March 2026. So even artificially holding back the exchange rate isn't working anymore. Annual inflation at the end of July was almost 6%, and the central bank raised its own forecast for the whole year from 4 to 4.5%, all the way up to 7%. Well, such a jump is an indication that the economy has huge problems. The inflation expectations of the population are 13.7%. Which is almost twice as high as the actual inflation. And this means that people are preparing for the worst case scenario. That is, they see the current inflation, but they say no, it will be almost 14. And when expectations are like this, you understand what the mood is. The key interest rate was lowered to 14%. But analysts are already predicting that in October or even in September, the reduction will most likely be paused, precisely because of rising inflation risks. And most importantly, the budget deficit for the first 7 months of 2026 amounted to 6.5 trillion rubles. According to analysts from Sbership, by the end of the year the deficit could reach 7.6 trillion rubles. That is almost twice as much as the original forecast. And let me remind you, because according to analysts, all these indicators, this economic decline, inflation expectations, the huge hole in the budget, all of this, by the end of the year the deficit could reach trillions. That is from January, meaning the year,
Падение экономики, инфляционные ожидания.
Has come into effect.
Это все при том, что в России с 1 января 2026 года
A large-scale tax reform has come into force. Many have already forgotten about it. The basic VAT rate was increased from 20 to 22%, and the progressive personal income tax scale was introduced with rates ranging from 13 to 22%. And the requirements for small and medium-sized businesses were also tightened. But as you can imagine, even that didn't save the budget. That is, in a way, of course, it made this hole a little smaller, but it still didn't save it. According to official data as of August 18, well, there is official data for August 18. Russia has already spent a little over 30 trillion rubles, while its revenue is only 22 trillion. The gap keeps growing literally every week. And one final point. What has happened literally in the last 2 days shows that talk about a crisis stopped being just theory a long time ago. And the day before, a video appeared of the Ukrainian armed forces striking the largest threat. The campaign against e-commerce giants in Russia is expanding beyond just Wildberries, which means the economic cost for the Kremlin continues to grow. Russia's total manpower losses since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine as of mid-August have reached almost 1.5 million killed, wounded and missing. And the rate of destruction of Russian evens, that is manpower, according to these same estimates, has already surpassed the rate of Russian conscription. Every month, at least 30,000 Russians are killed or critically wounded on Ukraine's sacred soil. But at the same time, Sergei Lavrov, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, stated at the United Russia Party Congress on August 22 that Russia does not intend to come to the West to negotiate. And he blamed the Western countries themselves for declaring war on the Kremlin. Formally, this sounds like an unyielding position of strength, like we will not come to you to negotiate. But this statement is made exactly at the moment when the ruble is at its March lows, and the budget deficit is simply getting out of control. And Moscow's own mayor, loyal to Putin, says out loud what, as he puts it, is killing normal life and a normal economy. He says this war of Putin's is killing normal life. Bottom line. The name Black August was originally just a journalistic cliché for a series of historical coincidences. Well, you see, yes, it's always in August that something happens in Russia. But this year, behind that label, it's not coincidences, but specific measurable processes. The ruble has crashed to multi-month lows. Inflation is accelerating. Budget deficit, and it's growing faster than any forecasts. And the most telling thing is the open discontent within the Russian elite itself. Now voiced by the head of Sberbank and the mayor of Moscow. Putin publicly insists that there are no critical consequences. But notice, if before he said that there were no consequences at all, now he emphasizes that there are no critical ones. But in reality, everything is only getting worse, worse and worse. And you know, if it helped, I'd keep all my fingers crossed for a real Black August to hit Russia literally today. So that it would finally put an end to its disgraceful existence. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone.